Yes, yes, I do.
Can you have a look too? Can you see the screen or whatever?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, so just the last technical details with the microphone.
Perfect.
Okay.
So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Gabriela is the candidate for this PhD dissertation defense. You know already the jury, the panel is made by Professor Antonio Ladrón de Guevara Martínez from the Universitat Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona. He is acting as a secretary. And as vocal, we have the pleasure to have with us also Professor Lena Arica Stenros from Tampere University, so a bit far away from here, north. I'm sure they would like to be here with us this morning, but unfortunately, you know, the situation, the pandemic situation obliged us to go for this virtual defense. I will act as president of the panel. I'm a member of this university. I'm full professor at the SADE, which is member of the university, but I am also the vice rector for international relations and students of the university. So for me, it's a big pleasure for several reasons, among others, because when someone is going to defend a dissertation, is a wonderful news for all kinds of institutions. But of course, for us as a university, it's a privilege to have people that wants to, first of all, go for a PhD degree, and secondly, to accomplish the studies, the itinerary, let's say, with the last act, which is the defense of the dissertation. So congratulations to the university, and specifically, congratulations to La Salle as the institution that is hosting this defense. Traditionally, is the secretary of the panel who make the official welcome, but also above all explaining a bit the rule of the game. So although the virtual situation, I don't want to break the rules. So Antonio, whenever you want, you can have the floor.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, it's my turn now to welcome everyone. Good morning and welcome.
Just a moment, Antonio. We need to adjust the volume and the listening. Let's see if it's possible, because we have some. At least I have some difficulty to hear you clearly.
Really?
Or maybe I am the only one, or you can hear him. No.
Are you listening? For instance, Lena, are you listening to me properly?
Yeah, I hear you well. So for me, it's your voice.
Yeah. Probably is the echo of the big room where we are placed right now. So let's. But anyway,
you want me to talk a bit just to check the control?
Start again, Antonio.
Yeah. I can start talking so you can control the. Does it sound properly? I don't know, maybe I can start with the welcome, although there's some echo.
It's a problem of echo in reality. So, Antonio, if you don't mind, just before what I will talk on behalf of you.
Okay.
So let's, but then we will need to solve a bit the situation, above all when you will have to raise the questions.
Okay.
So I said good morning and welcome everyone. According to the records of Universitat Ramon Llull, La Salle, the thesis of Miss Ana Gabriela Balladares Fuentes, supervised by doctors Francesc Miralles and Christopher Kennet, with the title Changing Consumer Behavior in the Digital Age, Perceived Risk in Information Search Process, was approved for public presentation on the 11th of November 2020 by the Academic Commission of the Doctoral Program in Information Technology and its application in Management, Architecture and Geophysics, following the recommendation of 3 independent reviewers. The Doctoral Thesis Commission of the Ramon University on the 2nd of February 2021 has ensured that all legal requirements have been met and has appointed the following examining committee. Myself, Carlo Maria Gallucci Calabrese as president, Lena Arica Stenros as member, and Dr. Antonio Ladrón de Guevara Martinez as secretary of the committee. So you have a truly international panel, a Spanish, a Finnish, and an Italian. So wonderful. Ms. Ana Gabriela Balladares has up to 1 hour to put forward the thesis and read the conclusions, although you know that if you can be shorter, it will be welcome. And after the speech, the president will give the floor to the candidate, but let me explain a bit the rules. After your speech, I will ask the director of your thesis to address us some words. After that, I will ask my colleagues of the panel to start with the questions. I will ask first Professor Ladrón to start, and then Professor Arica, and they will place all the questions they consider they have to. You can take note, so you'll be sitting, so you can take note of all the questions. And at the end, I will place some questions to you too. So then you have the right to ask for a break if you need it to organize your answers or not, it's up to you. Then you will reply. This is your election again, to do it globally or individually or mixing up a bit. After that, the panel has again the right to place new questions or consideration if any member of the panel wants to. At the end, if there are new questions, you will have to ask them, to answer them, sorry. But at the end, I will ask all the doctors attending, not here, attending, virtually even, this act, if they have any things they want to say. They have just to say them. They have not the right to place questions to you. So they have just to say something they consider important to be said. After that, if I am not wrong, Antonio, correct me, we will abandon the room and we will have a private meeting to get our conclusions and to deliberate. After that, we will come back again in this room. We will ask all of you to stand, and we will give you the result. What the result, and that's it. And then we will have a private session to fulfill all the administrative requirements to make it official. Is it clear? And Antonio, are you okay with this? All right. So whenever you want, you can start. If there is any trouble, Antonio and Lena, in following the presentation, please let us know, and then we'll try to solve it as soon as we can. This is one of the members of the university, very specialized on all those things, digital things. So we are supposed to be in very good hands. So I'm sure they will solve immediately any kind of problem. Right, so please, Gabriela, whenever you want, you can start.
Okay. So good morning, dear members of the doctoral panel, Professor Carlo Gallucci, Professor Antonio Ladrón de Guevara, and Professor Lina Arica Stenros. Dear directors, Professor Miralles and Professor Kennet, dear members of the doctoral school, and all my friends from the Lasallian family. Today I have the honor to present my dissertation that has for title Changing Consumer Behavior in the Digital Age, perceived risk in information search process. I would like to thank the members of the doctoral panel for their invaluable feedback and for making this learning process more valuable for me. I would like to thank their engagement and their time during this time. So the agenda for today, I'm going to start by explaining the research background where this dissertation is framed. Then we are going to review the literature, the research gap, and the research questions. Then I'm going to present the theoretical framework where this research builds on. We are going to discuss about the research design, findings, discussion, and finally, we will have the conclusion on contribution and avenues for further research. So the digitalization of the marketing environment is changing the manner in which consumers are taking decisions. By digitalizations, we refer to all the changes that are occurring due to the advances in information and communication technologies. For example, we see the internet as an important marketplace. We see how digital media is having an effect in information management. We also see how consumers are having conversations, and actually they are also having transactions on the web. All this has made that literature propose that there is a change in the paradigm of how consumers actually interact with firms. And also what we see is that the rise of the internet is changing consumer behavior during the search stage of the customer journey. Moreover, we observe that perceived risk is having a determinant role on how consumers search, and this all is changing due to this digitalization. So the phenomenon that we observe here is that consumers are using both channels, traditional information channels and digital information channels. And having said that, we find that there are two types of products, or a product categorization paradigm based on search and experience type products. So for example, search products are those that their characteristics are easy to evaluate before purchase or before actual contact with the product. So I bring here the example of the pen drive. You can see here the brand, you can see the capacity, you can see the speed, and you can learn about the price without having an actual contact with the product. On the other hand, we see experience type products, and I put here the example of a consumer trying on how does it feel to be inside a car. And this is the products that you can actually have to evaluate in person to learn about these attributes. So what we are observing is that instead of that consumers are using these two types of products, and that actually they are preferring for experience type products the traditional information sources. However, what we are observing is that instead of observing a clear-cut situation where we could predict the use of traditional information sources for experience type products and digital information sources for search type products, what we are actually observing is a combination and a seamless and dynamic integration of the two types of channel for the purchase decision-making process of an experience type product. So what we observe is that risk is determinant in certain purchase decisions. We use that consumers are using both types of information channels, and all this is changing due to the digitalization of the marketing environment. However, we don't see, and there is a lack of theories that explain how these changes are occurring and how the digitalization is changing perceived risk during information search. Therefore, our overarching research question asks, how does the digitalization of the marketing environment affect consumers' perceived risk during the process of information search? So we now start with the literature review. We start by saying that the relevance of understanding the purchase decision-making process lies in that it explains how marketers can actually have an impact or have an effect on how consumers take decisions. So we learn about the traditional theories. There are many models. One of the most recognized is the model of Angel, Blackwell, and Mignard. And he sees the purchasing process as a process consisting of stages. And as you can see here is a model that is very linear and sequential. We also have here the funnel theory that says that as we advance in the process of purchasing, we narrow down the products in the consideration set. Moreover, we see, as we were saying at the beginning, the digitalization of the marketing environment and all the changes that are occurring. And we have here emerging literature that is actually considering these traditional theories, and new theories are emerging. So the digitalization of the marketing environment, what we review in the literature is that there is the eruption, of course, of Web 2.0. We see the creation of user-generated content. For example, here we see how Amazon had a role in this digitalization. We see the stars, we see the feedback. We also see that mobile technology is increasing. So you can see that consumers are always checking products in their mobiles, and the use of social media. So ultimately, what we observe is a blurring between the barriers of what we call the traditional world and the digital world. Actually, what we observe now is that there is this dynamics or this use of the two types of information. The purchasing process and the authors, for example, Edelman, Ander, Falstad, and Bale, also Professor Verhoeven and the study in Lemon and Verhoeven in 2016, what they are saying is that actually the purchase decision-making process becomes more cyclic and dynamic. Also consisting of what we call, and what it's stated in literature as the touch points, that they are having an influence in how this purchase decision-making process becomes in the actual digital era. And we see that consumers are having an extended and dynamic evaluation phase. So what we see in the literature is that when consumers are purchasing experience type products and they cannot find or fulfill their information needs in digital channels, what is going on is an iteration between, I'm sorry, I'm confused with it. We see an iteration between the traditional sources and the digital sources. And this is changing in the current digital era. So in terms of information search, we know that it has a determinant role on how consumers take purchase decisions, and also that there are many factors that affect search behavior. Of course, perceived risk, that is the one that we are looking at. We see perceived knowledge, situation and involvement, product complexity, time pressure, and so on. So having explained the paradigm of the product, the different types of products, what we are observing is that consumers are preferring digital sources for search type products. They prefer traditional sources for experience type products, and that higher risk or higher perceived risk can be attached to the digital information sources. So looking at the literature on perceived risk, what we observe is that it's defined as the natural predisposition to avoiding losses through purchase activities. Also, we see that consumers, it is impacting the way that consumers are searching for information and evaluating products. We understand that perceived risk is not a one-dimensional construct, but actually it has many types or many dimensions. For example, performance risk, financial risk, physical risk, time risk, psychological risk, and social risk. Moreover, we find one of the proposed model, that is the one of Conchar, Sink, and Peters, and Olavarrieta in 2004, that actually what proposes is that perceived risk occur in phases, that actually perceived risk is a process, and he proposed that it occurs in stages, and also that perceived risk is being affected by the consumer's context. So looking in more detail and trying to understand how perceived risk and information search are related, what we find is that there is a branch of literature that is saying and stating that as consumers engage in information search, their perception of risk is decreased by looking at this information. However, on the other hand, we find other big group of studies and research that is saying the opposite, that actually by engaging in information search, the perception of risk of these consumers can go up in these digital environments. So what we are observing in the literature is that there is there are contradictory findings on the expected relationship between perceived risk and information search. And this could be a potential paradox found in the literature review. So this gives rise to propose the research gap as follows. So perceived risk has a determinant role on how consumers in their search behavior. We see the contradictions between these two constructs, or the expected relationship between information search and perceived risk. So we propose to, or this research proposed to advance with a finer grain approach and with a longitudinal perspective. We base this on the premise that Conchar sees perceived risk as occurring as a process when this is affected by the context. And we need to bring the risk perception perspective to explore how these two types of information sources are used. So we have our overarching research questions that this triggers this research, and then we state sub-questions. This is one of the contributions in the review process. So the reviewers actually help us to group these sub-questions into main blocks. The first one has to be with this paradox, with the relationship between perceived risk and information search. So we ask, why are there contradictory findings on the first place? Why we find this contradiction in the perceived risk literature and in the search literature? Also, as we see that there are studies which points out that perceived risk occur in phases, we ask whether time has a role in the manner in which perceived risk unfolds during information search. Finally, we ask ourselves, what is the interplay? What is the relationship between these two constructs, both from a time perspective or from a temporal perspective? In the third of questions, what we ask is, what's the role of the digitalization? How can the changes in the process of perceived risk and information search can be explained as part of the digitalization of the marketing environment? Also, what is new there? What are the new concepts, relationship, and meanings that are having a role in perceived risk during information search? And finally, how this changes now that consumers are using both information sources, digital sources and traditional sources. So I'm going to drink a little water. Sorry. So talking about our theoretical framework, we are taking, after reviewing the literature, we are taking as references the study of Lemon and Verhoeven in 2016 on the cyclic and dynamic purchase decision-making process that now it's called the customer journey. We also take into account the proposed model of Conchar et al. In 2004, Edelman, Grant. So we see that, as they say, the customer journey now looks like, instead of a linear and sequential process, it is a process. We also see but we actually don't understand what is the relationship between information or information search and risk perception. We know that consumers use internal and external information, and we know that this information comes from digital and traditional channels. So for deciding the theoretical perspective, we conducted an analysis on the nature of and the philosophy of research in the social sciences. And as you know, there are two main approaches, one that is positivist and the other one is the interpretivist. So given the nature of our research questions, and that we are considering that this phenomenon has a lot to be with the context and with the actual context, we find that an interpretivist perspective best suits this research because we are understanding consumers, which are individuals, and their context. And this all, in addition, is happening in a context that is fast changing. So this is a fast changing environment. Therefore, looking at the ontological assumption, we see the reality as people. We see the phenomenon as highly dependable on the researcher interpretations. Because what interpretivism perspectives and taking into account the epistemological assumption, what it's trying to do is not just to evaluate the surface responses of participants, but actually trying to understand what they are actually doing. Finally, in terms of method, we know that qualitative methods are related with interpretivism studies. So in terms of methodology, we review the literature on methods, and we find that decades ago, consumer behavior research was conducted mainly using quantitative approaches. However, given the complexity of human behavior, there is a growing trend in the use of qualitative and mixed methods approach, as pointed out in the study of Golding in 1995 and also in 2005. So we find that interpretive approaches best suits this research because we are studying individuals' behavior and how the actual digital context is affecting their search behavior. So we find that phenomenology is a methodology that suits this type of research because we are trying to inductively develop a pattern of behavior. We are trying to construct an animated, evocative description of consumers' behaviors and their reasons. And we want to get a deep understanding of their reasons. The procedure of phenomenology involves an extended and prolonged engagement with consumers. And also we find that in order to understand a process, longitudinal designs fits with phenomenology, and therefore we adopt this methodology. So how do we gather data for this research? So as Golding in 2005 points out, the only one legitimate source of data are the views and experiences of participants themselves. So what we did was to find consumers that were actually in a purchase decision-making process at the moment. We don't look for past experiences, but actually we find for those consumers who are going to search for information and that they are considering to buy a product. So we use the longitudinal study using multiple qualitative methods, and we the inclusion criteria were those that were buying products with high significant experience type attributes, and also that are products that are moderate to high involvement. So we use example cars, motorcycles, the electronic devices, high-end garments. And so what we also did was to select consumers that can be included in the group of digital natives. And digital natives are defined as are those who live their lives involved in technology. So basically, this type of consumers, as we were saying at the beginning of how the blurring between the traditional world and digital world, now it's blurred. Actually, for this type of consumers, they don't know what is the barrier there. In their lives, they are using digital and traditional information sources. So we use references from La Salle students, and we also use principles of snowball sampling. So we ask for references, friends of friends, and we conducted the study using the university facilities and some public places here in Barcelona. So we had the data collection happens in two main stages. The first one was the focus group. We have there three focus groups of homogeneous individuals of the digital natives. They were between 6 and 10 people, and we interacted in this first stage with 24 people, with 24 participants. After having a first understanding of the phenomenon, we refined the questions to be asked to the participants in the second stage of in-depth interviews. There we had, as it's a longitudinal study, what we did is to interview the same consumer in different stages of their purchasing process. So for example, we had between 2 and 3 interviews with the same individual or the same consumer. We interacted there with 17 participants, and also we asked them whether they could complete a consumer diary. So we obtained 5. So when we have all this data, to analyze data, we use analytics, because it's pointed that all the texts that are generated there can capture all the details of their experiences, and that these are well suited for phenomenological studies. So what we did was to record the focus group, record each interview, transcribe all the recording into text, and then we conducted 2 cycles. So we had at the focus groups, we had 2 cycles of, and this is following the procedure of phenomenology and hermeneutics of Thompson. And we conducted the intratext, which is that we have the text of the first focus group. We understand the whole phenomenon, and then we move to the second cycle that is called the intertext cycle. That is when we cross the 2 focus groups. We follow the same procedure for the in-depth interviews. And what happens is that as focus group happened first, we could get a gaining of what was going on there and what construct relationships and meanings we were gaining from this first stage to refine for the second stage of the data analysis. It's worthy to mention the ethical considerations. First of all, we follow all what is for qualitative research. All names that you will see in the findings part is it's anonymous to actually conserve the anonymity of the participants, and all the participation was voluntarily. They didn't receive any course credit, anything in exchange. So we use en vivo pro software for code all the concepts, relationship, and meanings. We use longitudinal coding, as pointed out by Saldaña in 2000. We also use time bracketing because we are conducting a longitudinal study, and we selected 4 representative stories that are the 4 that you can find in the thesis document. So now we move to findings. I'm having trouble to breathe. Okay, so the findings, what we identify in the process of perceived risk processing during information search that are the following. I'm going to present what are the emerging concepts that occurs at every stage, and at the end we are going to present a follow-up of the concepts. So the first stage is called preparing for information search. And what we find there is that consumers are using key reference points for to prepare for information search. In this stage, or this stage is characterized because consumers haven't engaged in information search yet. They are not taking actions of looking at webs, but they are preparing for their journey. So one example here is Robert. He's buying a car and he says, what I will do is to get information on the internet. I will search for information about the car to see the good things, bad things, and then I will go to the dealer to ask about those things. So this is an example on how a consumer actually knows what is his or her plan to advance in this process. So when we look to the second stage, what we see there is that Rod is having a trust on how consumers are using information. So they are able to decrease risk as they trust the information. We also see that they discover mechanisms of financial loss recovery. And we identify a potential association between perceived risk and performance risk. For example, Garrett, who's a male participant, he's buying a laptop and he says, with a computer, you have to look at everything very well, because these things are much more expensive. So here we identify, and this is an example on how as more expensive is the product, they're more concerned about performance. In the third stage of advanced information, is the following. Consumers have gathered information, and what they actually find when they are using digital information sources is that emerging types of risk occur in this phase. It means they start reading blogs, and they are now concerned not only with financial risk and with performance risk, but actually on whether the information is not biased or they are being scammed, or all the particularities of the digital channel. So for example, here Ed, who's buying a laptop, he shares what later, and then check that they have money back accordingly, search for another option. So consumers are fearing that buying through digital channels, they have to put more effort in returning items. In the here, something that I'm sorry, one of the emerging things is also the perception of social risk. We were actually, as literature mentions, that there is social risk involved in these type of purchases. We were actually expecting to finally see where specifically consumers were perceiving social risk. So finally, we see it at stage 3. And this is explained not only as the increased exposure that consumers are having when they are sharing their purchasing decisions on the web, but more because they feel that they are responsible for the purchase outcome. So they say, actually, it's an effort, because now as we are taking the decisions in the purchasing process, and we are not asking a salesperson, we cannot blame a salesperson if the decision goes wrong. So the example here illustrates this well. So Oliver, he's a male participant who's buying a smartwatch, and he says, for people who use more the digital world, it's an extra cost in terms of the level of effort. It is actually an effort, because if you don't search much and you make a mistake buying the wrong product, you have to justify that product in front of your peers, and also justify how good shopper you are and yourself. You have to feel good with your purchase decision. So I think it carries an extra mental load on people who buy now. So this is an example of how they are perceiving social risk. In the fourth stage, what we observe is that consumers have information. They ask their key reference points to trust or not the information they find there. And we see that they are preparing to take a purchase decision. For example, Maurice, he's a participant buying a laptop, and he says, it's almost 300 euros cheaper and I can pay by monthly payments. So I'll pay it little by little every month. This is an example of how financial risk perception is decreased with the option he in this case, discovers in the information that he is actually looking at. Finally, in the fifth and the purchase decision making and post-purchase behavior, what we are observing is two scenarios. Whether they are able to decrease their perception risk at an acceptable level, they decide to purchase. On the other hand, when they are not sure and they still perceive risk that is not at an acceptable level, purchase deterrence happens. So the example here, we had one participant that in the end, during the study, he decided not to purchase at that moment and he sells. I would say that what influenced me most to postpone my purchase is the money. If I had a lot of money, of course, I already bought it. So here, what I brought is the follow-up, because it's really difficult to illustrate how we follow up each construct during the 5 stages. So here we have these stages. So we have our first 4 initial concepts, relationship and meanings. When we move from stage 1 to stage 2, we see how key reference points remains the same. We also see how perceived performance risk goes up, goes down, or goes up depending on trust. We see that perceived financial risk goes down when they encounter in the information mechanisms of financial loss recovery. For example, they say, well, in the end, I feel perceived risk when I'm buying a smartphone that it's expensive, and I'm thinking a lot about that because it's expensive. However, I find that I can use certain apps to resell it in the case that I regret of that purchase. So this is a way that help or aids consumers in decreasing financial risk. Also, as they perceive risk, the action plans or the information search activity is going to increase as well when performance increases. So here we have the 3 emerging concepts at stage 2. So we see the role of trust, the potential association between financial risk and performance risk perception, and we see the mechanisms of financial loss recovery. Moving to the 3rd stage, we see that if consumers still perceive risk, they use key reference points. If consumers don't trust on the information, what occurs is that consumers engage in additional information search. And this can lead to these emerging types of perceived risk. This is a deterioration of trust that actually causes that the perception of financial risk goes up again. So as they don't trust the information, they are concerned about losing money, being scammed, and so on. Therefore, perceived financial risk goes up. The plans to engage in more information search remains the same. And we have, as I was saying, the initial perception of social risk. Moving to the 4th stage, we see the key reference points that increases. And this is because as they have a great amount of information, what they do is to ask someone that they trust, a friend, someone, a YouTuber that they trust, or someone who can be used as a key reference point. The new types of risk that we identify goes down when they actually use these key reference points. Performance risk goes down as they are using key reference points. Trust improves. Financial risk is also decreased because they discover these financing options. The mechanisms of financial loss recovery remains the same, and perceived social risk is also increased in the 4th stage because they feel the need to comply with others. Finally, we see the emerging types of concepts that are fatigue, acceptance, conviction. Purchase deterrence occur here when risk persists. However, if performance risk and financial risk are at an acceptable level, purchase decision-making happens. Finally, we actually interview people even after they made the purchase decision. And actually, we see that they are in even more information just to reinforce their decisions. Having said that, I had an example of one of the narratives in the document. I will use it just as an example. So Monica, she's an architecture student, and she explains, for example, that she had these characteristics of the product. We ask her, how do you know about these characteristics? She replies that actually she asked her boyfriend, he's telling me what is necessary for my new phone. So from there, I will search for a smartphone. We see here that key reference points occur. Also, in terms of financial risk, what she actually says is that she needs to think very well if she's doing the investment or not. So we see financial here. And also she explains that what worries her at the moment is the term of the warranties. She says, warranties, that I have difficulties contacting the person where I buy from. For instance, I don't like purchasing on the internet because of that, because I can't go there. Because if something happens with the smartphone, I can't talk face to face with anyone and solve my problems. Continue, what we see is that she asked a friend, so she shares. I spoke with my friends because he knows a lot about technology, and these are the key reference points again. She engages in information search. So what she says is that she links she clicks on the links that her friend sends her, and she sees that there is a brand. In that moment, BQ brand website was offering her insurance in the case that the phone breaks or if it gets stolen. Therefore, she was very interested in that aspect. So we see here actions of information search. So she followed the advice of her friend. And what she says is that when she enters to the website, she says, the website is so beautiful and the smartphones are so beautiful. And there is one that I really like. So here also another emerging concept is the hedonic value that surges. Finally, she tells us that we ask her, but at the beginning you told us that you don't trust in digital channels and you were going to go to your physical store. However, she changed her mind due to the use of key reference points, and she said that actually in these pages the warranties are maintained. So she is decided to buy from there because her perception of risk is being decreased. Also, she discovered financing options. She says, there is a financing plan of paying it in terms of 3 months and exempt of interest. I think it's Christmas campaign, so I decided to purchase one. And she likes the mobile there, and actually she's willing to pay even more. So we also see that financial risk goes down as they discover these options on the web. Finally, we always had, after the final interview with the participants, we had a moment of reflection also with them. And she reflects that what influenced her most was her friend. She says, if I would start searching by myself, I would lose even more time and I wouldn't be sure about what I was buying. So I trust on the advice of my friend. So now we move to the discussion for dynamics of putting the findings, contrasting it with existing theories, going back to data, and we had these dynamics as is explained in phenomenological and hermeneutics procedure. So on the nature of perceived risk and its relationship to information search, what we provide is a finer grain approach of perceived risk. What we add there is the temporal perspective of perceived risk that allows us to appreciate the relationships that are occurring in all these variables involved in and affecting perceived risk during information search. And unlike dominant quantitative literature, we are able to explain how actually consumers construct their search path. So it's not something that is predetermined, but actually as consumers are searching for information, dealing with risk, decreasing risk, new types of risks that emerge, what we are in agreement is with the constructive approaches. We also see that time has a role in this relationship, and what we find is that if previous literature see the contradictory findings, is because they are looking at a one-spot event and not as something that changes and fluctuates over time. We also see that this fluctuation is explained by two types of loops. Some moments of progression, when consumers are able to decrease perceived risk by certain information search, and other moments of regression where they encounter new types of risk or where their risk perception increases. And also on the relationship between perceived risk and information search, what we find is that there is a causal relationship through time. So here, for example, the study of Conchar, it was saying that actually perceived risk is an outcome of information search. Or what we bring into the literature is that actually this relationship is dynamic. Also, we provide how and why the customer journey is dynamic. On the changes of perceived risk concepts, relationship, and meanings as part of the digitalization of the marketing environment, what we find is that there are some concepts that are found in previous literature, but that change due to this digitalization. So for example, trust, we see how not just depending on whether the consumer can touch a product, is trust what determines whether the information on the web is able to reduce risk. I'm sorry. Also, the use of key reference points, it's in agreement with theories that are constructive, and what I actually find here is that when dealing with social risk, key reference points have a determinant role. We use how user-generated content is being affecting the manner in which consumers perceive risk. And also, we see in this third stage how social risk actually in digital environments, it seems increased and even more important than before the digital era. One of the things that we explain is the effort. So we see the study of Bedman et al. In 1990, which states that when purchased, consumers have some goals to obtain. So for us, and for this research, minimizing perceived risk is a new meta goal. On the emerging concepts and relationships of the digital era, what we see is that previous risk literature study the different types or the different dimensions of perceived risk in a separate manner. What our findings suggest is that we should understand that this type of risk also interact with each other. So that's how we find that there is a potential association between performance risk and financial risk. And on the discovery of mechanisms of risk reduction in digital channels, we take the study of Mandel in 2003, who actually states that there is a cushion. So the cushion theory, what says is that when consumers are buying, they rely on their friends and family to make purchase decisions because they find support in these people. What we find in the medical study is that the cushion becomes wider because consumers are not only interacting with friends and family, but they are interacting on people that they rely on the web, such as influencers, such as people who have blogs there. And also we see the influence of the hedonic value, which is related with financial risk perception. Finally, we find, on the one hand, we find mechanisms of risk reduction, and on the other hand, we see new types of risk that emerge. And what we find is enough to extrapolate the different types of perceived risk found in previous literature to the digital environment, but actually it needs a more complex understanding because the types of risk whether they are from previous literature or are the ones that emerged in this study, they behave in a very particular way, particular to digital environments. So if we compare the previous model of perceived risk, what we find is that there is not linear, and we find that there is interaction between the risk importance or the risk dimensions and the weights that it has at the beginning of a purchase, and how consumers search for information. Also, we find this dynamic relationship on the overall perceived risk and the information that they obtain. And also that these risk perceptions affect their search path. That's why we say that in digital environments, we take this constructive approach. So from this, you can see in the, and you saw in the document, I will not read the propositions, but actually what we do is propositions on the nature of perceived risk, on how this construct changed due to the digitalization of the marketing environment, on the new knowledge that we provide, and on the way that we can actually adapt the model of Conchar and add the temporal perspective and the dynamics over there. So we have the process model. We have to thank and the members of the panel because it shows and it illustrates the proposition of this new model. So what we observe here is that, as you can see in the different lines, this is how the different types of perceived risk change and fluctuate as consumers engage in information search. We also see the dynamic nature, or that over the time of this process, information search and perceived risk interact with each other. And also we see how the different constructs that occurs at the touch points are actually affecting the manner in which consumers perceive risk and search for information. So finally, the contribution. We have theoretical contribution. The first one is that we elucidate the research gap that we identify in previous literature. By providing a finer grain approach, we are able to identify 5 stages in this process. We clarify how is the relationship between perceived risk and information search in digital environments. We include temporality, uncovering the dynamics of the two constructs in these digital environments, and all this knowledge is necessary for the theorizing process of perceived risk during information search in digital environments. Second, there is explained and is explicit in previous studies that there is a need for new knowledge on this process. So what we do is that we bring the phenomenon and we contextualize it in the actual scenario of the digital age. And what we do is that we provide with this empirical study that is real life data and data that occurs at real time. So we can extend the model of Conchar by providing the empirical evidence on what are the processes and the interactions that are occurring in these particular digital settings. We also explain and find support on the changes in paradigm that were stated before. 3, we are providing how and why the customer journey, as Edelman in 2010, as the study of Lemon and Verhoeven in 2016, they state that the purchasing process becomes cyclic and dynamic. We are actually justifying that one of the explanations is the role of perceived risk. We also describe how is the relationship of consumers and firms during these touch points. We are bringing a customer perspective. So as I was saying, we cannot predict the use of one channel or the other depending on the nature of the product, but more from the perspective of the consumer. And also, for instance, Lemon and Verhoff, they point out that research was necessary for the specific segment of digital natives. So we are providing a better understanding from this specific segment. In terms of methodology, we also contribute to literature by bringing all the meanings and insights that are context dependent. We offer an understanding not only on what is going on, but on the hows and the whys of consumer behavior during purchase. We also explain better what is the ontological nature of perceived risk, as we see risk as occurring as a process and not as a one spot event in the purchase decision-making process. We also bring a clearer picture because we can see the phenomenon occurring from the beginning to the end. So we are not looking just at one specific point in that trajectory, but we are providing a more realistic explanation of this big picture. Finally, translating and importantly also, we contribute to the marketing practice because we provide knowledge that helps them better understand where they can act in order to reduce the perception of risk in their consumers. Therefore, this can help to enhance the experience of consumers during purchase and thus increase the engagement of consumers with the brand. And this also clarifies where firms should allocate their resources in order to improve these customer experiences. We translate also the contribution to the marketing practice into recommendations for firms on how to decrease risk and improves the experience of consumers. Finally, of course, we understand that this research has limitations, but these limitations gives avenues for further research. So the first limitations, as we were explaining at the beginning in the lit review, information search behavior is affected by many factors. And we have studied and we have opened the box of perceived risk, but actually there are other factors such as perceived knowledge or consumers' experience with the brand as other types of research that could be and could provide more knowledge for the theorizing process of the customer journey. Second, this research focuses, as we know, in experience type products. And these experience type products were tangible products. So further research could be done with the experience type services, such as traveling, hotels. One, because they are high involvement type of services, they are expensive, and you can never have the experience of the hotel before actually going there. So further research could go directed towards that type of research. So I want to take the one more minute of your time to say thank you once again to the members of the doctoral panel for your engagement and for your insights. You not only improve the quality of the dissertation, but actually improves my learning process during this dissertation. And of course, it's a learning process, if not the most relevant one in my life, one of the most relevant learning processes that I have experienced in my life. I want to thank again my two directors, Professor Francesc Miralles and Professor Kennet, for their advice, their guidance, their patience, and especially their support. I will be always grateful to them. I want to thank also to all my Lasallian family, friends, professors, also the doctoral school for teaching us what it's to become an engaged scholar. So I will be grateful to them. And finally, to my friends and family, whether they are here in this room, and I'm sure there are many people connected, I want to say thank you. So now I open the room for questions.
Good. Thanks so much for the presentation. So So now it's my pleasure to give the floor to the directors of the thesis, Francesc Miralles and Christopher Kennet. So it's up to you if you want to say any word, but now you need the microphone for that. Do you have an extra microphone? No. This one, okay. Maybe we can clean it.
Thank you, Professor Gallucci, for the opportunity to just say thank you to the effort of the member of the panel. I think that the PhD dissertation is a kind of learning process, and your participation and your contribution on the reviewing of the document and so on has for sure contribute to the improvement of the learning process. In that sense, thank you very much for that. And the second thing that I would like to add is just to thank Gabriela for the presentation. Thank you very much, and congratulations for the presentation. It has been a pleasure to hear how you just defended your work, and that has been very, I think, interesting for us and grateful from the perspective of the work that you have done. I don't have anything to add. In addition to that, I think that the work is there, and you can just evaluate that based on what Gabriela said and what the document just explained and so on.
Thanks, Francesc. Well, just to say, kind of reinforce what Francesc said. Thank you to the panel and for your contribution to the learning process. And thanks to Gabriela. It's been a pleasure to be involved in your research over these years. Thank you for your hard work, your professional approach to everything you did, and your determination, and you're always coming to the meetings motivated, enthusiastic. I think half the time you motivated me to direct your research more than I motivated you. Sometimes I don't know, but it was a team effort. I thank Francesc for that as well. And so congratulations from my part. And again, really nothing to add more than, I think after these years, you can see a relevant piece of research which opens up these avenues which you identify at the end to improve the theorization around this topic, which is surely necessary, and some very interesting contributions to the theoretical frameworks which maybe are no longer so relevant or need to be rethought. And I think that's one of the most important roles of research, this critical approach to thinking about new realities and how to interpret them. So congratulations from my side, and thank you very much.
Okay, so thanks so much to the director of the thesis, and now is the moment for questions. So our colleagues are already prepared, as I can see from the screen. So I'm glad to give the floor to Antonio Ladrón, Professor Antonio Ladrón from Universitat Pompeu Fabra, and he will address the questions to you, doctoral candidate. And please take note, and that already you know the process, how it works. So Antonio, whenever you want.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start saying that, well, I want to congratulate you, Ana Gabriela, because of what I consider is a really, really good, complete piece of research, which is your doctoral dissertation. We met many years ago, 10 years ago, 10, 11, I was checking, I was your teacher, and I'm really, really surprised of how you've been, focusing on research, and you've been developing you're developing your research career. So congratulations. Let me tell you that for me, this dissertation, I'm not that familiar with all these topics. You know, I'm quantitative. I'm an engineer. You know, let's say my research background is based on quantitative research. So for me, not a challenge, but you know, it was about reading a topic that on one side was new for me, all these things related to perceived risk, this dynamic between the perceived risk and the information search along this customer journey was, although we are all marketers, we all have intuition about consumer behavior, we are all consumers. So on one side, your thesis was familiar for me in the sense that I really enjoyed all these topics and all this literature, which I was not that familiar. But honestly, for me, it was really, really nice to get into your research, and I did enjoy a lot your reading your dissertation. So it was really didactic for me. So okay, I'm going to go into specific questions, and the first one is related to the fact that, as you say, purchasing online gives you brings new types of perceived risk. And page 209, just to at some point you say the study of Kim et al. Focuses on transaction risks such as providing substantial personal information in online store websites, which definitely is a risk related to online purchase. Then in page 212, you mention all the risks which are related to online purchase, perceived risk of fraud, perceived risk of product loss or damage, also perceived risk of having to engage in a return process. But at some you also mention other sources of risk, but in this case of risk reduction due to purchasing online. No, like in page 206, you mentioned that consumers discover financing options and possibilities to resell products. Sorry, are you listening to me properly?
Antonio,
I am. Yes.
let's see if she's understanding your question, because there is a problem with the echo. So are you getting the question?
Just to make sure I'm understanding well, you're asking about the new types of perceived risk and also the new mechanisms of reduction, right?
Yeah, I'm talking about sources of risk and also risk reduction based on online purchase compared to physical purchase.
Okay.
Okay, but I haven't asked the question. I was just describing. You listen properly? Are you listening?
Okay.
Okay, I continue. If you don't understand anything, just ask. What I was gonna talk about is that I also perceive an important source of risk reduction based on the quality, the post-sales quality of services provided by trustable retailers like Amazon, for instance. I don't know in other countries, maybe in the United States it's not that drastic, but at least here in Spain, Amazon, trusted retailers like Amazon have allowed consumers to perceive a much lower risk when engaging in return processes. For instance, Amazon sometimes give you 90 days of free return. They have a wide range of alternative places to facilitate your returns. So I think that this is a very relevant and differential aspect compared to traditional retailers. So my question is, what do you think about that? Do you think that trusted retailers like Amazon are adding value by reducing this financial risk through the high quality post-sale services? Because I personally think that this has changed quite a lot in the last year. So online retailers have been differentiating significantly based on post-sale services. This is the first question. What do you think about them? Are you listening to me properly now, Ana Gabriela?
Yes.
Okay. So
Just-
I'll make a couple of.
Just to let you all know, I have asked the organizers to connect you to the computer
Okay, so I
with
can
the
listen
headphones.
clearly. Okay.
So for sure you will listen exactly what professor are going to ask you. Okay.
Okay.
Just a moment, please, because
Yeah. Perfect.
Looking for headphones and you will be connected directly.
Thanks.
Anyway.
So just
sorry for this,
maybe say the question again to make sure.
Yeah, the question was, my question, I'll read it again. What do you think about that, about what I said? Do you think that online trusted retailers like Amazon are adding significant value in reducing the financial risk based on the high quality of the post-sale services? Because for me, consumers, I think that this is something that as a consumers I've felt in the last years, they facilitate post-sales services, return, warranties compared to traditional retailers. So for me, this may be a very relevant source of value creation and also risk reduction in financial, or perceived risk reduction in financial risk, perceived significant reduction of the financial risk. This will be the first question. Are you listening to me properly now, Ana Gabriela?
Yes.
Okay, so the second aspect I want to talk about is about the risk of not using the product in the end. You mentioned that at some point that one risk of buying online, which is not using the product at the end. This is related to impulse products. You also mentioned at some point in the proposition, the emergence of perceived risk of not using the product in the end. This particular emerging type of perceived risk is related to the impulse of purchasing too many items. So, what I think in that sense is that my personal opinion is that online purchases, or let's say online retailers, do facilitate purchase of impulse products, but or do promote impulsive purchases through this, let's say, facilitation of returns or post-sale service as well, because compared to traditional retailing, if you go to a mall to buy some clothes, well, of course you can at the end buy impulsively some products. And this was an important limitation years ago, for instance, for clothes, when buying clothes online, what if the size is not the appropriate, what is it? But in my opinion, things have moved the other way. Now online retailers do allow you for changing freely the size or changing the product with so in that sense, my perception is that retailers through these high quality post-sale services are really promoting impulse purchases. This will be the second question. What do you think about that? Do you think that e-commerce is really promoting impulse purchases due to this facilitation for consumers to handle with post-sale acquisition, or with the product acquisition? The third aspect is related to the social risk definition. Okay, you say at some point, social risk, the definition of social risk, that is one of in which consumers believe peers may evaluate them negatively to a purchase they make. And then at some point, you highlight that as the digitalization of the marketing environment widens the extent to which consumers' actions become more public. But I personally think that in some occasions it's the opposite. you know, the anonymity of the online processes may sometimes, in my opinion, may also imply a reduction of the social risk, at least in some occasions. I always think of my students, you know, now that we are all teaching online, they're much more participative than they used to be. And you know, I usually have 80, 100 students, and they really feel ashamed of, but online, the anonymity allows them to really participate much more. And this is somehow related to that perception of, in my opinion, sometimes doing things online allows you for this anonymity. And instead of increasing this perception of social risk, shouldn't be the opposite? Don't you think that the anonymity, the question is straightforward, is don't you think that the anonymity of the online processes implies a reduction of the social risk or the perception of the social risk? And the last question, more than a question, is something that for me comes to my mind as a very interesting extension for this research. When you talk about experience products, we move into the third dimension, which is credence products. You know, the definition of durable products, the best definition I've ever read about durable products is based on an economic textbook that says that a durable product is a product that consumers expect you to provide a service for a certain period of time. When you buy a car, you expect transportation. When you buy a washing machine, you expect the product to provide you cleaning service. And by this definition, always you face uncertainty even after acquiring the product, because you expect the product to be reliable for a certain period of time. So for me, buying durable means buying a product for which credence attributes may be relevant. So in this case, for me, risk is still perceived after purchase. Okay, so my question in that sense is, does this match with your research ideas? The fact that consumers after purchase keep on facing uncertainty, so they may eventually keep on needing to collect information, to interact in that way. You think that it would be an interesting line of research in your agenda, moving towards this post-sale kind of risk facing, due to the fact that when buying a product for which credence is the credence attributes are relevant? Do you understand the?
Yes.
Okay, so this will be all my question and my.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Again, congratulations for a very, very good piece of research. Welcome.
So I'm free to answer, or should I wait till the end?
I don't know what's best. If you answer by what do you think? Maybe for you it's easier to answer now, and then Lina asks you, because otherwise they're going to be too much. No.
Yes, and I think my questions are a little bit different. So I think my questions concern a little bit different things. So I think it would be wise now to respond to Antonio's questions, and then we can move to my questions.
Good.
If that's okay for you.
That works for me.
It's okay?
Yes.
For you? So now, please, then the floor is to Professor Lena Arica for placing the question to the.
But I think it's okay if Gabriela first answers to Antonio's questions. I think it's good to.
Yeah, I think it's best for her to.
So should I answer the
Okay.
question? Okay. Professor Ladrón de Guevara, thank you very much for this invitation to reflect on my dissertation. It's an honor to discuss about the topic I researched. So what we were talking about in the first question was whether the name or the reputation of the seller has a role in this risk perception, right? So it's something that we consider And actually, one of the things that were determining whether the participants in our studies were trusting the information, one thing that they consider was not only the source of the information, but also where the information was posted. So it's something that we consider, and that actually it has a role on how consumers trust. So this is something that improves the feelings or the perception of trusting the information that consumers are perceiving. So the answer is yes. The reputation of the sources of information, they have a role on how consumers can decrease their perception of risk by engaging information there. So for example, I remember one participant. She was a girl who was buying lots of high-end garments, and she was saying whether she was trusting more on the official website of the product than on external types of blogs. Moving to the second question, on the specific risk of not using the product and the impulse buying, what we find in one of the emerging purchase decision-making process literature at the beginning, they state that actually by searching for information online, it was easier because you don't have to go to the room and try on clothes, for example, or go to the dealer. But actually, when you're purchasing online, the only effort you have to do is to click, and then I'm purchasing a lot. So one of the worries was that on the one hand, it was easier to add products to your shopping cart. So it was an impulse buying, but they felt that actually as it's effortless in the digital channel, they were putting more products, and then they were regretting that they were buying too much on the one hand. And on the other hand, they also shared, if I'm remembering these interviews, and one of the consumers said that actually sometimes he was buying more things just to take advantage of the free delivery, or just to reach an amount of money so the delivery was for free. And in the end, he was finding himself with lots of product that they were not needing in the end and that they were not considering. So of course, there is impulse buying in the digital channel, but what we identify and conceptualize as the risk of not using the product is that actually this is something that stops consumers from buying, because in the end they end up buying a lot of consumers. Regarding the third question of social risk, what we find is that the type of product that we consider were those that consumers share on social media. And the specific segment of digital natives, they are social by nature. We didn't find any example where they were actually hiding their purchase decisions. What we observed was the opposite. The more they share, the best experience they have, because they are social in nature. So they need to share every single step they do. And for the type of product that we looked at, we didn't find any product that could be embarrassing or that they could buy in private. So on the findings based on this empirical study, actually what we find is that actually consumers are more social than ever. And that's why we find that social risk is even more important when we use digital information sources, because they use social media and they what they look is to share their purchasing processes. So for our study, we didn't find any need to hide the product they were buying, but actually their perception of risk was to take the best decision, so afterwards they could show off. Actually, the example of I think Oliver is his fictitious name, was that after purchase, he tells us how he shares and how he can't wait to share on social media his new smartwatch. And regarding the fourth question of credence product, yes, we find two the product categorization paradigm and this study of Core Gaunger that actually he classified products as experience type products, search products, and credence products. So credence products is, for example, all these Merkel creams, that anti-wrinkle creams that you cannot evaluate with the first try, but you have to wait until 1 month after you use it. But then we find, and we use as a reference, the one that has to be more on the physical contact, not on the performance, in long-term performance of the product, because of the literature that we found, and that takes the credence attributes as those that are also experiential, that you have to try on before evaluating the product. So so having said that, yes, we take the credence attributes, let's say, as an experiential attribute. And of course, that's why one of the I remember a girl in the focus group, it was very at the beginning, she was buying a car and she said, how can I trust what the sales dealer tells me at the physical store if he doesn't have a car and if he hasn't used the car for 3 years? I prefer to read reviews on the web of someone who have used the product for long term. So I hope I'm answering your questions, Professor Antonio.
Antonio? Dan?
Yeah, I'm happy with your replies, with your answers. Just in the last thing related to credence, I would like to also to remind you that characteristics like durability when you buy clothes or when you buy other durables may become important. So this aspect that what I was saying, that it's very likely that when you buy durables, there may be some or reparability, durability, this characteristic that these are credence characteristics, no? So
definitely.
But it's just a mention. Great, thanks.
Okay,
now
thank
it's
you very
Lena's
much,
turn.
Professor Ladron. So now the floor is for Professor Lena Aurica, which in reality there it's 1:30 where you are right now. So was your lunchtime already passed?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. So first of all, thank you, Gabriela, for really nice doctoral work and really nice presentation on the highlights of your work. I totally agree that the topic that you have been examining, how digitalization changes customer behavior and risk perception and decision making, and using different kind of information sources to reduce the risk. The topic is really relevant, and we can now see that how this pandemic era is even more boosting this kind of behavior. We are looking even more information through online and doing our purchases via online. So the topic is really relevant. I do have 4 questions to you, so I try to be rather clear with the questions. These are rather, I'd say, big questions. They are not concerning details, but they are more like your overall choices when you were doing this study, and also some questions that might extend your study further. So first of all, I would like to ask positioning your study. Your study is now positioned to consumer behavior, decision making, risk reduction. But you are, so I see that this is your primarily positioning, but you are also using customer experience research. You are studying, you are also using customer journey approach, but that is some kind of secondary theory in your work. You are using that really lightly. And I was actually wondering this. I would like to answer. I would like to ask you why you decided to position your work into customer decision making and risk reduction, and not on consumer experience or consumer journey, because many of your examples from data also concerned the full customer journey from starting to search different kind of alternatives to how they experienced the product. They had that smart watch that they wanted to share and show in social media. So I think that was also, all those stories could be analyzed also as a customer journeys or as a customer experiences. So first of all, I would like to ask you, why did you position your work as you did? So what is the explanation for that? Why you chose risk over experience? Then the second question concerns your methodological choices. I'm a qualitative researcher myself, so I really understand that you chose qualitative methods. You explained that there was a paradox, what literature was saying about information search, so it's rather natural to take qualitative approach to solve that, what is actually behind this paradox. So what are, when we are asking consumers themselves, so how they explain the complex situation and how we can then find some rationale behind their behavior. You did have a lot of different kind of qualitative research actions. You did have diaries, you did have focus group discussion, you had interviews. So I would like to ask you, what was the most valuable data set that helped you to solve your questions? So was it diaries? When you presented your research, you kind of followed one consumer's pathway through decision making. You gave a lot of examples via individuals and they anecdotes or they narratives. So are they coming from diaries, or so what was the most valuable data set that you had? And also I have another question related to the methods. Your topic would allow you to use also an ethnography approach. So ethnographic in digital context. So I was thinking that, did you ever think using that kind of method? So these two questions concerning your methods. Then my third question concerns the nature and the essence of digital sources. So consumers were seeking information from digital, in digital context, from digital sources, and you used digital source term many times. And I was actually thinking that there's a lot of variation when we are talking about digital information sources. Yourself, you showed that there was, for example, user-generated contents, digital word of mouth, kind of digital information where the pure users have generated the information. But then you also showed us how consumers seek information from web pages by providers themselves. So I was thinking, or I'm thinking, that digital sources are actually really, there's a lot of variation when it comes to digital information sources, and also to their credibility, and also to the perspectives that they provide, what kind of information they provide. So I would like to ask you, what did you learn about from this aspect on digital sources? Were there different kind of categories, provider originated digital information versus user generated digital information? And then some of information is more visual, like pictures, videos on, okay, here I am using the product. And some is more textual. So what did you learn about these different kind of digital types of information? That is my third question. I would like to just you to elaborate this a little bit. And then the fourth question concerns the key contribution of your study. What do you see? What is the key contribution of your study? Is it the model that you proposed us, or is it the propositions, or is it the some kind of rationale for the paradox from where you started? That okay, does information help, or does it make things even more complicated? So what do you think that? What was your key contribution? So these are my 4 questions.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much, Professor Arika, for your questions. I think I will follow the same order of your questions. So discussing about the positioning of the work and comparing the risk perspective rather than the customer experience perspective. The thing is that when we identify the gap, we see that nowadays what was shaping consumers' search for the experience type products was that risk was involved in this type of products in the customer journey. So we didn't look into the consumer experience literature, although we use, of course, literature from there, because that's a new story. So actually, either you take the risk perception perspective or the experience one. So based on the gap that we identified in the literature, that it was clear that there was a contradiction when it comes to perceived risk. That's why we took that way. However, and I was saying in the findings, there is relevant information coming from these empirical studies that actually can also be taken into account into the customer journey and the customer experience. And that's my answer for that question, I think. And yes, so talking about methodology, why we selected phenomenology and not, for example, ethnography, that is the ethnography you do in online. And then I'm going to approach the most valuable source of data. What we understood when we were analyzing the literature on methodology is that when you are trying to understand what drives a person to take a purchase decision, sometimes if you, for example, pass a questionnaire, they can answer yes or no to questions. And while doing the in-depth interviews, and I remember well one cases, what we realized is that sometimes we say how we do things, but actually we are not seeing what is underneath the immediate response. I put an example. For example, we asked this, it was a student of architecture, and we asked him whether he was considering to buy a desktop of the Apple brand. So we asked him, do you care about what others says about you and the brands that you use? And he answered, no, of course I don't care what others says. But then as we advance in the interview, he ended up saying that actually he wanted to give good impression, not for himself, but for his office that he was going to open. So that's why the image was important for him. So actually what he's saying he do is not what actually we find out that he was actually doing. So that's when I thought that that's the magic of qualitative research, that you can, by asking different questions, several questions, and engaging in this process of understanding, well, what we are doing and what we are saying we do, sometimes it's not the same. So that's how I value the qualitative approach, because instead of having representativeness or a big sample and looks for patterns that are homogeneous, what we are looking is for the particularities of the consumer in the digital decision-making process, and also we are looking for the in-depth analysis. So we look for depth instead of extension. If I had to choose what is the most valuable source of data, this is a very difficult question, because the focus group that we conducted helped us ask the correct questions in the face of the interviews. So I think that it's a flow of they complement each other. So the interviews wouldn't be as good as they were if we wouldn't engage by looking at the big picture of the phenomenon in the focus group. So I think in the focus group, what I value the most is that we are considering that the consumer is social. So we wanted to see the social interaction between the participants, because they were actually interacting in the focus group. This is for me the contribution of the focus group. First, that it helped us narrow down the questions to be asked in the in-depth interviews, and second, that we could see the interaction and the social interaction, something that is so relevant for this research. But I think that when we were more in-depth was in the in-depth interviews, is when we actually had the sincere and deep conversation and follow-up. And as I was putting the example, to see how they say one thing at the beginning and in the end they end up doing the other way, right? So she says, I'm going to buy in the physical store, but in the end she ends up buying on a website. So I think that's the strength of the research is in the in-depth interviews. And yes, of course, we considered ethnography, but we wanted to ask directly to a consumer and follow him or her up. So sometimes in ethnography, you cannot make sure that you will engage again and again with the same consumer. Finally, on the essence of digital sources, and yes, you mentioned user-generated content, e-word of mouth, peer user. So your question is, what did I learn about these aspects of the digital sources? So one of the things, and this comes more to the contribution to the marketing practice, I related a lot. So what we learn and recommend actually is that consumers are trusting as Professor Ladrón de Guevara was saying at the beginning, right? The Amazon brand, we all trust in Amazon. And so what we actually find is that consumers trust in official websites, and at the same time, they trust on realistic pictures. So we also got examples on how when they see a picture that is too professional, it is suspicious to them. So they say, okay, this person is endorsing this brand, this review is biased, because the picture doesn't look like that natural. So one of our recommendations and the contributions to the marketing practice is that brands can take advantage of this finding and allow consumers to have their conversations into their spaces. So you have one message that it's being verified by the brand, but at the same time, you see honest reviews on all this word of mouth and user-generated content that we are observing in the digital environment. Moving to the key contribution, if it's the model or the propositions, I think that the propositions are the formal statement of what we find in the model. I think that the main contribution is that by providing this qualitative data from a consumer perspective, we are able to discover that perceived risk is not behaving the same way if you look at it in traditional settings. So imagine we can take a time machine and go back to the past and understand well perceived risk in traditional information sources. So we shouldn't try to understand risk as it was before, but now in this new paradigm. So what I propose in this dissertation is that risk is multidimensional, that risk is a process. It's not one isolated point that we can measure and on a scale from 1 to 10, what is my perception of risk, because it depends. So our contribution is to say that the perception of risk depends on many interaction and processes that occurs during the purchase decision-making process. Because as we saw, it is affected by many factors. And third of all, as thinking ontologically, perceived risk is a process and not one single construct. So I think that the main contribution lies in understanding these dynamics and these processes that are occurring during information search and evaluation and the purchase journey, and affects how consumers perceive risk, the different types of risk, and actually how they fluctuate over the time of that process. I hope I have answered your questions.
Yes, you did, and thank you for answers and congrats for nice work.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so now it's my turn. Yeah.
Gracias.
Okay. So first of all, congratulations for the thesis as a whole, but not only from the writing part, let's say, but also because the presentation of today. It's been a long presentation, but was okay in the sense it was going very well and smoothly, which is a good sign. I would like to congratulate La Salle, because of course is the hosting institution, and you are you have been educated here for the PhD, and University Ramon Llull, because it's the one who's going to deliver the degree. I also want to congratulate your family. I know that your mother is connected, I guess, from Nicaragua. Does she speak English or
as
no?
you wish.
So if you don't mind, I will switch just a moment into Spanish. Por tanto, quería felicitar a la familia de la candidata. Si he leído bien el nombre, tu madre es la señora Casilda. Por tanto, señora Casilda, en este momento su hija está haciendo algo muy importante, en el sentido que en el mundo de la academia el máximo nivel que se puede alcanzar, no hay más, es este, llegar a ser doctor. Y el trabajo que ha hecho es bueno y espero que la deliberación final del tribunal haga que a final de la mañana su hija haya alcanzado el máximo nivel académico, que es el de doctora. Así que enhorabuena a la familia, porque en estos casos pues la familia siempre tiene mucho que aportar en lo bien y en lo malo, pero en este caso seguramente en lo bueno, y también a tu familia local, digamos así, porque sé que tienes de alguna manera familia local que te están aquí apoyando, además físicamente en la sala. O sea que muy bien. Now I go back to English, to my poor English, by the way, and I will go with my some questions. Let's see if I'm able to express what I want to say. Your work, in a way, offers new insight, very updated, because now with the pandemic, as Professor Arika was mentioning, really it's really up to date. We all have been experiencing something like, even old guys like me. So you say that these are new insight into the behavior of perception of risk. I'm going to talk directly to the perception of risk. In the online shopping experience of high involvement products. When it comes to the offline, not the online one, offline shopping experience, do you think this perceived risk behavior could also be found in the offline shopping, in this kind of shopping? If so, why would you say has not been analyzed? How would you justify it? Maybe you can answer would be, well, this is something that you can explore in a new dissertation, but anyway, I would like to know why online yes, offline not. From the result of the study, we are left with the idea that the perceived risk is a kind of process, no? It's a process nature. And this means that it evolves and that it can present behaviors and relationships in the different phases of this buying experience. So despite this evolution, would there be comparative features for the different types of perceived risk behavior? Could it even be thought that there were patterns between the different types of perceived risk behavior? So your contribution focuses on the evolutionary nature of perceived risk and the characteristic or aspects that justify this evolutionary process of perceived risk. So both. It is already pointed out in the work that further progress would be needed in delimiting, let's say, this behavior of the evolutionary process of perceived risk. Now, given the work that you have done, what role can the buyer's personality traits play? I mean, risk reduction mechanisms, risk aversions, risk tolerance, blah, 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 blah. So this is, in a way, there are questions, reflections, call them the way you want. You ready to answer, or you need some time for that?
Yes. If I miss something, you can ask.
Please go ahead. It's your right.
Okay. Okay, so the first one is if we perceive risk in the offline world. What we learned from participants is that actually they are not making this distinction. So they see perceived risk as a construct that affects their behavior as they search for information, but not differentiated whether they search online or offline, but actually so the phenomenon is understood when these new things are integrated as sources of information. So the answer is yes. If they perceive risk during the purchase decision-making process, it's because they are perceiving risk that comes from online sources or from traditional sources. Actually, the study in which we built our theoretical framework, that is Lemon and Professor Verhoef, that I had the pleasure to actually meet in one of the conferences in the Netherlands, is that consumers are using what they call showrooming. That it's that you go to the store, you see the product, you try on, and then you end up buying online. So the answer is yes, they perceive risks also by going to the physical store. What type of perceived risk we observe there? For example, time risk, or losing time, or engaging in an effort. As we learn, consumers try to reduce the amount of effort when they make purchases. So of course there is risk implicit in the offline, when they take the purchase decision offline. What we also bring into the table is that sometimes consumers, and that's why we focus on the search and information evaluation stage of the process, because it's what actually shapes the final decision. So if we look just on where they buy, we would lose the whole story on how actually they obtain information. So this is another thing related to this question that I would like to say. Also, in terms of how perceived risk evolves as consumers move from, in this case, the phases that we identified, phase 1 to phase 5, and how personal traits can have a role there. Yes, so this could be a further research, actually, because we interviewed digital natives that they are characterized as having some traits. And also we interview, as you know, in our university, we have students that are international students. So basically we had international studies in Barcelona. This was our sample. And yes, I think that they say, for instance, one girl says that she prefers to ask a friend that lives here, and other prefers to actually ask someone that is on the web and that they don't know personally. Yeah, my opinion is that it affects, but we didn't look at those personal traits, but rather we looked into the behavior and how consumers of the digital natives behave, and what are their perceptions. So I think this can happen in studies of, for example, social cultural studies, and of course we were seeing in the data, and of course it affects, but we focus more on the specific behavior of these consumers. So if I didn't lose any question, right?
Yes, now the question, my colleagues from the panel, do you have further questions for the candidate? No? Okay. So then at this point, I have to ask all the doctors that are sitting in this room or door who are connected virtually, if they have anything to say. Do they? It seems that no one has nothing to say. So at this point, Gabriela and the rest of the people, we have to move, in my case, physically to another place to deliberate with my colleagues. Okay? So in, I hope, short period of time, we will be back with the result.
Okay. Thank you very much.